The surgeon's words still echo in my mind as I sit here today. Jennifer, you're giving your stepdaughter not just a kidney but a second chance at life. What he didn't know was that she had already given me something just as precious. The chance to finally be called mom. But getting to that operating table took 3 years of heartbreak, rejection, and a love so deep I was willing to sacrifice a piece of myself to prove it. I'm Jennifer Martinez. And 3 years ago, if someone had told me I'd be preparing to undergo major surgery to save the life of a 16-year-old who once screamed at me that I'd never be her real mother, I would have thought they were insane. Because back then the idea of Megan Rodriguez even tolerating my presence seemed impossible, let alone accepting an organ from my body. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning that changed everything started like any other Tuesday in Phoenix, Arizona. I was working from my home office in our Ahwatukee neighborhood, responding to emails for my digital marketing consultancy, when my phone rang with the kind of urgency that makes your stomach drop. It was Carlos, my husband of 2 years, calling from his physical therapy clinic in Scottsdale, and his voice was shaking in a way I'd never heard before. Jen, I need you to get to Banner Desert Medical Center right now. Megan collapsed at school during her volleyball practice. The paramedics are taking her to the emergency room, and I'm stuck with a patient who's in the middle of a critical session. Can you please go be with her until I can get there? My heart stopped. Despite 3 years of constant battles with my stepdaughter, despite her endless reminders that I wasn't family, wasn't wanted, wasn't needed, my first instinct was pure maternal panic. Of course I'll go. What happened? Is she conscious? The school nurse said she complained of feeling dizzy and nauseous, then just collapsed. She was conscious when they loaded her into the ambulance. But Jen, she looked so pale. I've never seen her like that. I was already grabbing my keys and rushing toward the garage. I'm leaving now. Drive safely when you can get away. I'll text you updates. The 15-minute drive to the hospital felt like hours. My mind raced through every interaction I'd had with Megan over the past 3 years, searching for signs I might have missed. Had she been more tired lately, less argumentative? I realized with a pang of guilt that I'd been so focused on navigating our difficult relationship that I might have attributed any changes in her behavior to typical teenage mood swings. Megan Rodriguez was 15 years old, a sophomore at Mountain Point High School, and the most beautiful, stubborn, fierce young woman I'd ever encountered. She had inherited her mother's striking features, high cheekbones, expressive dark eyes, and thick black hair that she wore in elaborate braids for volleyball games. From her father Carlos, she'd gotten her athletic build and competitive spirit that made her one of the best players on her school's varsity team, despite being younger than most of her teammates. She'd also inherited something else from both parents, an absolutely unwavering loyalty to family, which unfortunately for me, meant an equally unwavering rejection of anyone she perceived as threatening that family structure. When I first met Carlos Rodriguez 3 years earlier at a networking event for local business owners in Phoenix, I was 31 years old and had pretty much given up on finding lasting love. I'd moved to Arizona from Colorado 5 years prior to escape a particularly devastating breakup and start fresh in a city where no one knew my history of relationship failure. I'd built a successful digital marketing business, working with local restaurants and small retailers, bought a cute townhouse in Tempe, and convinced myself that career success and weekend hiking trips in Sedona were enough to make me happy. Carlos changed everything. He was 38, recently divorced, and had this way of making even the most mundane conversation feel important. As the owner of Rodriguez Physical Therapy, he spent his days helping people recover from injuries and surgeries, and his passion for his work was infectious. When he talked about helping a car accident victim walk again, or enabling an elderly patient to regain independence after a stroke, his entire face would light up with purpose. Our early relationship felt like something out of a romantic movie. Weekend trips to Flagstaff when the leaves changed colors, dinners at hidden gems in downtown Phoenix that only locals knew about, long conversations on his back patio, while watching spectacular Arizona sunsets paint the sky in impossible shades of orange and pink. He was thoughtful in ways that surprised me, remembering that I didn't like cilantro in my Mexican food, bringing me coffee from my favorite local roaster when he knew I had early morning client calls, leaving little notes in my car when he knew I was having stressful days. But Carlos came with complications I'd never had to navigate before: 2 children from his marriage to Isabella Rodriguez, a successful pediatric nurse, who had remarried and moved to the more affluent Paradise Valley area with her new husband, a cardiologist named Dr. Michael Chen. The custody arrangement meant that Megan and her younger brother Diego spent alternating weeks with Carlos, plus rotating holidays and school breaks. It was a schedule that worked well for the adults, but seemed designed to ensure that the children never felt fully settled anyway. Megan was 12 when I first met her, all sharp elbows and sharper words, with an attitude that could cut glass and a protectiveness toward her father that bordered on fierce. Diego was 9, quieter but equally suspicious of any woman who showed interest in their dad. Both children clearly adored their mother Isabella, who by all accounts was an exceptional parent, and they made it abundantly clear that they saw no need for any additional maternal figures in their lives. I tried so hard in those early months. I read every book I could find about blended families, joined online support groups for stepmothers, and even attended a few sessions with a family therapist who specialized in divorce transition. I thought if I could just be patient enough, understanding enough, loving enough, the children would eventually see that I wasn't trying to replace their mother but simply wanted to be a positive addition to their lives. I was incredibly naive. My first real indication of the battle ahead came during what was supposed to be a fun family outing to Castles and Coasters, an amusement park in North Phoenix. This was about 4 months into my relationship with Carlos, and he thought it would be good for us to spend time together as a group in a relaxed, fun environment. The day started well enough. Diego seemed cautiously interested in the arcade games, and even Megan cracked a smile when Carlos won her a stuffed dolphin from one of those impossible basketball shooting games. But the mood shifted dramatically when Carlos suggested we all ride the Desert Storm roller coaster together. "I want to sit with Dad," Megan announced, linking her arm through Carlos' with possessive determination. "That's fine," I said, trying to keep my voice light and unconcerned. "Diego and I can sit together, right, buddy?" But Diego, taking his cue from his older sister, shook his head. "I want to sit with Dad too." Carlos looked uncomfortable, clearly recognizing the power play happening, but unsure how to address it without causing a scene in the middle of a crowded amusement park. "How about we ride twice? First, I'll go with the kids, and then maybe Jennifer and I can ride together." Megan's response was swift and cutting. "Why would we want to ride twice just so your girlfriend can pretend she's part of our family? She's not our mom, and she's never going to be our mom. We already have a mom, and she's amazing." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my cheeks flush with embarrassment, as other families waiting in line turned to stare at our clearly dysfunctional group. Carlos looked mortified and began to scold Megan, but I quickly intervened. "It's okay," I said, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face. "You 3 go ahead and ride. I'll wait here and take pictures when you come around the loop." That night, after we'd dropped the kids back at Isabella's house, I cried in Carlos's arms while he apologized repeatedly for his daughter's behavior. But even as he held me and promised things would get better, I wondered if I was setting myself up for years of heartbreak by trying to love children who were determined not to love me back. The challenges only intensified when Carlos and I decided to move in together after 18 months of dating. We found a beautiful 4-bedroom house in Ahwatukee, with a pool and a 3-car garage, close to good schools and with enough space for everyone to have their own retreat when family dynamics got tense. I was so excited about creating a real home together. I spent weeks researching the best paint colors for the kids' bedrooms, shopping for furniture that would make them feel welcome and comfortable, and planning how to set up common areas where we could build new family traditions while respecting their existing relationships with their mother. The reality was brutally different from my Pinterest-inspired dreams. Megan, now 13 and even more sophisticated in her rejection techniques, had perfected the art of making me feel like an unwelcome intruder in my own home. She would walk into the kitchen where I was cooking dinner, assess what I was making with obvious disappointment, and announced that she wasn't hungry because she'd rather wait for real food when she went back to her mom's house. If I tried to help with homework, she'd roll her eyes and call Isabella instead, loudly discussing how much better her mother was at explaining algebra or helping with history projects. Diego was less overtly hostile but equally effective at maintaining distance. He was polite in the way children are taught to be polite to adults they don't particularly like, saying please and thank you when necessary, but never engaging in real conversation or seeking comfort from me when he was upset or hurt. The house that was supposed to bring us together as a family became a battlefield where every interaction felt loaded with tension and unspoken resentment. Megan would invite friends over and introduce me as Dad's girlfriend who lives here, making it clear that I was temporary and insignificant. Diego would ask Carlos for help with things I was perfectly capable of helping with, walking past me as if I were invisible to find his father even when Carlos was busy with work calls or household tasks. The breaking point came during our first Thanksgiving together in the new house. I had spent days planning a perfect meal that would honor both Carlos's Mexican heritage and my own family tradition. I researched recipes for authentic tamales, practiced making Isabella's famous flan from a recipe Carlos remembered, and bought expensive ingredients to ensure everything would be special. The morning of Thanksgiving, I was up at 6 a.m., bustling around the kitchen with genuine excitement. This was going to be our first real holiday as a family, and I was determined to make it memorable for all the right reasons. I set the dining room table with my grandmother's china, created centerpieces with fall flowers from the garden, and even bought special Thanksgiving-themed napkins that I thought the kids might find fun. When Carlos, Megan, and Diego emerged from their bedrooms around 10 a.m., I was ready with hot chocolate and cinnamon rolls as a pre-dinner treat. The kids accepted the food with polite thanks, but immediately began comparing it unfavorably to Isabella's traditional Thanksgiving breakfast of Eggs Benedict, which apparently was a special tradition they shared every year at her house. The criticism continued throughout the day. The tamales were good, but not as good as Abuel Rodriguez's recipe. The turkey was fine but not as moist as the one Isabella always made. The flan was okay, but the texture wasn't quite right compared to the authentic version they were used to. Every dish I'd labored over was preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Met with polite appreciation followed immediately by unfavorable comparisons to their real family celebration. But the moment that shattered my heart completely came when I suggested we take a family photo in front of the fireplace, where I'd arranged a beautiful display of fall decoration. I'd been looking forward to this all week, imagining how nice it would be to have a photo of our new blended family to frame and display, something that would symbolize our commitment to building something beautiful together. Megan's response was swift and devastating. Why would we take a family photo with you? You're not our family. You're just Dad's girlfriend who lives in our house. Family photos are for real family members. Diego, following his sister's lead as always, nodded in agreement. Yeah, family photos are just for people who are actually related to each other. I excused myself to the bathroom, locked the door, and cried harder than I had since my father's funeral 5 years earlier. I stared at myself in the mirror, mascara running down my cheeks, and wondered how much more rejection I could take before it broke something fundamental inside me. I loved Carlos desperately, but was that love worth years of feeling like an outsider in my own home? Was it fair to any of us to continue forcing a relationship that the children were so determined to resist? When I finally composed myself enough to return to the living room, Carlos was having a quiet but intense conversation with both kids about respect and kindness. I could see that he was as frustrated and hurt as I was, caught between his love for me and his children's obvious distress about our relationship. That night, after the kids had gone to bed, Carlos and I had our first serious conversation about whether our relationship had a future, if his children never accepted me. He held me while I cried and promised that things would improve with time and patience, but I could see the doubt in his eye. He loved his children more than anything in the world, and if forced to choose between them and me, we both knew what that choice would be. I made a decision that Thanksgiving night that probably saved our relationship, though I didn't realize it at the time. Instead of continuing to fight for acceptance, or trying to win the children over with grand gestures and perfect behavior. I decided to simply love them quietly and consistently, without expecting anything in return. I would be kind, available, and supportive, but I wouldn't push for hugs, demand gratitude, or try to force family bonding moments that they clearly didn't want. It was the hardest decision I'd ever made, because it meant accepting years of potential loneliness and rejection while trusting that love would eventually be enough, even if it was one-sided for a very long time. Over the following year and a half, I learned to navigate our household like a careful diplomat, finding small ways to show I cared without overwhelming the children with unwanted attention. I would pack extra snacks that I knew Diego liked when he had soccer practice, but I'd leave them on the counter for Carlos to put in his bag, rather than making a big deal about my thoughtfulness. I would research solutions to problems Megan was having with school projects or friend drama, then casually mention helpful resources to Carlos, rather than trying to insert myself directly into her life. There were tiny moments of progress that kept me hopeful. Diego once asked me to help him reach something from a high shelf when Carlos wasn't around, and he actually said thank you while making eye contact. Megan occasionally accepted rides to friends' houses when Carlos was stuck at work, and though she spent the entire drive texting, she would sometimes respond to my questions about school with actual sentences rather than just grunt. But these small victories were always followed by setbacks that reminded me how tenuous my position in their lives really was. Megan would have friends over and I'd hear her explaining that I was just someone who lives here, rather than acknowledging any kind of family relationship. Diego would politely decline my offers to help with homework, preferring to struggle alone rather than accept assistance from someone he didn't consider a real family member. The most painful moments came during family events when their mother Isabella was present. School performances, sports games, graduation ceremonies, occasions where both households would gather to support the children, and I would feel like an awkward third wheel hovering at the edges of the real family unit. Isabella was always gracious and polite to me, but it was clear that she saw me as a temporary figure in her children's lives, someone who would probably be replaced eventually by whoever Carlos dated next. As I rushed toward the hospital that Tuesday morning, all of these memories flooded through my mind. Despite 3 years of careful patience and quiet love, I was still largely an outsider in Megan's life, but none of that mattered now. She was hurt, she was alone, and she needed someone to be with her until her father could arrive. Whether she wanted me there or not, I was going to make sure she wasn't facing whatever was happening by herself. The emergency room at Banner Desert was controlled chaos when I arrived, but the urgency in my voice when I asked about Megan Rodriguez got immediate attention from the triage nurse. She led me to a small treatment room where Megan was lying on a gurney, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. Her usually golden brown complexion was pale and waxy. Her thick black hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail rather than her usual careful styling, and she had dark circles under her eyes that I realized now hadn't appeared overnight, but had been developing gradually over the past few weeks. She was wearing her volleyball uniform, and seeing her looking so young and scared in that hospital bed made my heart ache with protective love that surprised me with its intensity. "Where's my dad?" she asked when she saw me walk in, her voice smaller and more frightened than I'd ever heard. "He's coming, sweetheart. He had a patient he couldn't leave, but he'll be here as soon as he can get away. How are you feeling?" For the first time in our 3-year relationship, Megan looked at me without any hint of hostility or resentment. Instead, I saw something that broke my heart. She looked scared, confused, and very much like the child she still was underneath all her teenage bravado. "I feel awful," she admitted quietly. "I've been feeling tired for weeks, but I thought it was just because volleyball season is so intense. Then today during practice, I got so dizzy I couldn't stand up, and then everything went black." Without thinking about our complicated history, or worrying about whether she would reject the gesture, I reached over and took her hand. To my amazement, she didn't pull away. Instead, she squeezed my fingers like she was holding onto a lifeline. "The doctors are going to figure out what's wrong," I said, trying to project more confidence than I felt. "Your dad will be here soon, and we're going to take care of you. You're not alone." It was the first time I'd ever been able to comfort Megan without her pushing me away, and even in the midst of my worry about her health, I felt a tiny flicker of hope that maybe, finally, she was ready to let me care about her. Carlos arrived at the hospital 20 minutes later, his scrubs wrinkled and his face etched with the kind of worry that only a parent can truly understand. I had been sitting beside Megan's bed, still holding her hand, when he burst through the curtained area of the emergency room like a man possessed. His relief at seeing Megan conscious and talking was palpable, but I could see the fear lurking behind his eyes as he took in her pale complexion and the various monitors beeping around her bed. "Misha, how are you feeling?" he asked, immediately moving to her other side and pressing a kiss to her forehead. The endearment, which he'd used for her since she was tiny, seemed to unlock something in Megan that my presence hadn't been able to reach. She started crying for the first time since I'd arrived, real tears of fear and confusion, rather than the stoic bravery she'd been maintaining. "Dad, I'm scared. I don't understand what's happening to me. I've been feeling weird for weeks, but I thought it was just stress from school and volleyball. Coach Martinez has been pushing us really hard because we made it to the state tournament, and I didn't want to seem weak, or like I couldn't handle the pressure." Carlos smoothed her hair back from her face, his own eyes filling with tears he was trying hard to control. "You're never weak, baby girl. You're the strongest person I know, but you should have told me you weren't feeling well. Health always comes first. Always." It was then that Dr. Amanda Patel, the emergency room physician, arrived with a clipboard full of test results, and an expression that immediately put all three of us on high alert. She was a petite woman in her early 40s with kind eyes and a gentle manner that couldn't quite disguise the seriousness of whatever she was about to tell us. "Mr. Rodriguez, I'm Dr. Patel. I've been overseeing Megan's care since she arrived. We've run some initial tests, and I need to discuss the results with you. Is this," she gestured toward me uncertainly, "is this Megan's mother?" The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. For 3 years, this exact scenario had been my nightmare, being in a situation where my ambiguous role in Megan's life would be questioned, where I might be asked to leave because I wasn't legally or biologically connected to her. I started to step back, prepared to give Carlos and Megan privacy for whatever medical discussion needed to happen. But before I could move, Megan's grip on my hand tightened. "She's Jennifer," she said quietly. It was the first time in 3 years that Megan had ever referred to me as family, and the words hit me with such unexpected force that I had to blink back tears. Carlos noticed the exchange and nodded to Dr. Patel. "Jennifer is my wife," he said, stretching the truth slightly. "Since we were still only engaged, she's part of Megan's family. Please go ahead." Dr. Patel pulled up a chair, and I immediately knew that whatever she was about to tell us was serious. Doctors don't sit down to deliver good news. "Megan's blood work shows some concerning abnormalities," she began carefully. "Her creatinine levels are significantly elevated, which indicates that her kidneys aren't functioning properly. We've also found protein in her urine, which is another sign of kidney dysfunction. I've ordered some additional tests, including an ultrasound and more detailed blood work. But I want to be honest with you about what we might be looking at." The word kidneys seemed to echo in the small treatment room. Carlos's face went completely white, and I felt Megan's hand start to tremble in mine. "What kind of kidney dysfunction?" Carlos asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's too early to know for certain, but given Megan's age and the pattern of her symptoms, we're looking at the possibility of a genetic kidney disease. There are several conditions that can cause this kind of rapid decline in kidney function in teenagers, and most of them require immediate intervention to prevent further damage." Megan looked between her father and Dr. Patel with growing panic. "What does that mean? Am I going to be okay?" Dr. Patel reached over and took Megan's free hand, the one that wasn't still clutching mine. "We're going to do everything we can to take care of you, Megan. Kidney disease is serious, but it's also very treatable. The most important thing right now is that we caught it before it progressed too far. You were smart to come to the hospital when you did." The next few hours passed in a blur of medical tests, consultations and waiting. Isabella arrived within an hour of Dr. Patel's initial consultation, still wearing her nursing scrubs from Phoenix Children's Hospital, where she worked in the pediatric intensive care unit. Her medical background meant she understood the implications of Megan's test results better than Carlos or I did, and I watched her face crumble as she processed what the doctors were telling us. "How long?" she asked Dr. Patel during a private consultation that I wasn't invited to join. "How long has this been developing?" Based on the damage we're seeing, probably months, maybe longer. Kidney disease in young people often develops slowly and doesn't cause obvious symptoms until it's quite advanced. The fatigue and dizziness Megan has been experiencing were early warning signs, but they're easy to attribute to other things, like stress or normal teenage exhaustion. I found myself thinking back over the past few months, searching my memory for signs that something was wrong with Megan's health. Had she been more tired than usual, less energetic during our brief interaction? I realized with a pang of guilt that I'd been so focused on the emotional distance between us, that I might have missed physical signs that something was wrong. Isabella must have been having similar thoughts because when she emerged from her conversation with Dr. Patel, she looked devastated. I should have known, she said to Carlos, tears streaming down her face. I'm a pediatric nurse, I should have recognized the symptom. We all should have, Carlos replied, pulling his ex-wife into a comforting hug that spoke to their shared love for their daughter, despite their failed marriage. She's been tired after volleyball practice, but what teenager isn't tired after sport? She's been drinking more water, but we live in Arizona. Everyone drinks more water here. While Carlos and Isabella processed their guilt and fear, I stayed with Megan as she underwent test after test, blood draws, urine samples, an ultrasound of her kidneys, and finally a consultation with Dr. Rebecca Morrison, a pediatric nephrologist who had been called in to evaluate Megan's case. Dr. Morrison was a tall, elegant woman in her 50s with silver hair and a calm presence that immediately inspired confidence. She spent nearly an hour with Megan, asking detailed questions about her health history, her family's medical background, and the symptoms she'd been experiencing. Megan, I'm going to be very honest with you about what we've found, Dr. Morrison said after reviewing all the test results. You have a condition called chronic kidney disease. Your kidneys aren't working as well as they should be, and based on our tests, they haven't been working properly for quite some time. Megan's voice was small and scared when she asked, "Am I going to die?" Dr. Morrison pulled her chair closer to Megan's bed and spoke with the kind of gentle authority that comes from years of delivering difficult news to frightened families. No, sweetheart. You're not going to die. Kidney disease is serious, but it's also very treatable. There are many options available to help your kidneys work better, and if necessary, there are excellent treatments, like dialysis and kidney transplantation that can give you a completely normal life. What caused this? Isabella asked, her medical training evident in the precision of her questions. Is it genetic? Could Diego have it too? We're still running tests to determine the exact cause, but given Megan's age and the pattern of kidney damage we're seeing, it's likely genetic. There are several inherited kidney diseases that can manifest in teenagers, and yes, there's a possibility that Diego could be affected as well. We'll want to test him as a precaution. The mention of Diego potentially being affected hit Carlos like a physical blow. The idea that both of his children might be facing serious health challenges was almost too much for him to process. I watched him struggle to maintain composure while his world shifted dramatically around him. Over the next 3 days, while Megan remained hospitalized for observation and additional testing, our entire family dynamic shifted in ways that no one could have predicted. The crisis had a way of stripping away all the petty conflicts and emotional barriers that had defined our relationships for 3 years. Suddenly, Megan's acceptance or rejection of me seemed insignificant, compared to the much larger question of her health and future. I found myself spending long hours at the hospital, bringing Carlos changes of clothes and home-cooked meals, coordinating with his physical therapy clinic to reschedule patients, and most surprisingly, providing comfort to Megan during the endless hours of medical procedures and waiting for results. Jennifer, Megan said on the second day of her hospitalization, during a quiet moment, when Carlos had gone home to shower and Isabella was meeting with social workers about Megan's care plan. I need to tell you something. I looked up from the magazine I'd been pretending to read, giving her my full attention. What is it, sweetheart? I've been really mean to you for a long time, and I want you to know that it wasn't really about you. I mean, it was about you, but not because of anything you did wrong. Her words surprised me. In 3 years, Megan had never offered any kind of explanation for her behavior toward me, and I had long since stopped expecting one. You don't have to explain anything to me, Megan. You were protecting your family and your relationship with your mom. I understand that. But that's just it. She continued, her voice growing stronger. I wasn't really protecting anything. I was just scared. When my parents got divorced, it felt like my whole world fell apart. And then when Dad started dating you, I was terrified that if I let myself care about you, something bad would happen, and you'd leave too. It seemed safer to just keep you at a distance. I felt tears prick my eyes as I listened to this 15-year-old girl articulate fears that many adults never learn to express. Oh, Megan, I'm so sorry you felt like you had to protect yourself from me. The thing is, she said, looking directly at me for the first time in our conversation, you never left. Even when I was horrible to you, even when I said awful things, you never stopped being kind to me. You never stopped caring about Dad, and you never tried to turn him against me and Diego. I've been watching you for 3 years, and you've been nothing but patient and loving, even when I didn't deserve it. The conversation was interrupted by Dr. Morrison arriving with the results of Megan's genetic testing, but those few minutes of honest communication had shifted something fundamental between us. For the first time, I began to believe that there might be hope for a real relationship with my stepdaughter. Dr. Morrison's news was both clarifying and terrifying. The genetic tests confirmed that Megan had a rare inherited condition called Alport syndrome, which causes progressive kidney damage and can lead to complete kidney failure if left untreated. The good news was that we now knew exactly what we were dealing with. The challenging news was that Alport syndrome was progressive and would likely require aggressive treatment to prevent Megan's kidneys from failing completely. The mutation that causes Alport syndrome is on the X chromosome. Dr. Morrison explained to our assembled family group. Since Megan has 2 X chromosomes, and the mutation appears to be on only one of them, her symptoms have been relatively mild so far. But the disease is progressive, which means her kidney function will continue to decline over time. Carlos asked the question we were all thinking: what does that mean for her future? What kind of treatment are we looking at? For now, we can manage her condition with medications that will help protect her remaining kidney function and control some of the symptoms. We'll monitor her closely with regular blood work and kidney function tests, but eventually, probably within the next few years, she'll likely need either dialysis or a kidney transplant. The word transplant seemed to hang in the air like a bomb that had been dropped but hadn't yet exploded. Isabella started crying again, and Carlos looked like he might be sick. But it was Megan's reaction that surprised me most. If I need a kidney transplant, how does that work? Where do the kidneys come from? Dr. Morrison seemed pleased by Megan's direct approach to the information. There are 2 main sources for transplant. Some come from deceased donors, people who have agreed to donate their organs after death, but those kidneys can be hard to find, especially for young people, and the waiting lists can be very long. What's the other option? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Living donor. Family members, friends, or other people who are willing and able to donate one of their kidneys. Living donor transplants are often the best option because the kidneys are healthier and the timing can be planned rather than waiting for an emergency situation. Carlos immediately spoke up. I'll be tested. Whatever Megan needs, she can have. Of course we'll all be tested, Isabella added. Family members are usually the best matches, but Dr. Morrison looked uncomfortable as she reviewed Megan's chart. Actually, there might be some challenges with immediate family members as donors. Mr. Rodriguez, your medical history shows that you have high blood pressure and a family history of heart disease, which could make you a poor candidate for major surgery. And Miss Chan, she said, addressing Isabella by her new married name, your blood type is O positive, while Megan is B positive. You're automatically incompatible as a donor. The room fell silent as the implications of this information sank in. Carlos might not be medically cleared to donate, and Isabella couldn't donate due to blood type incompatibility. Diego was too young to be considered as a donor, even if he turned out to be compatible. What about other family members? Carlos asked desperately. My mother, my sister, Isabella's family. We can certainly test extended family members. Dr. Morrison replied, but statistically the chances of finding a compatible donor outside of immediate family are much lower. We'll put Megan on the national transplant waiting list as well, but for a teenager the wait can be several years. It was then that I heard myself saying words that surprised everyone in the room, including me. What about me? Can I be tested as a potential donor? The silence that followed my question was deafening. Carlos stared at me in shock. Isabella looked confused, and Megan's eyes went wide with something that might have been hope. Jennifer, Carlos said carefully, you don't have to do that. You're not even technically family yet. But Megan's response cut through any objections he might have raised. Would you really do that, for me? After everything I've put you through? I looked at this brave, frightened 15-year-old girl who had spent 3 years trying to keep me at arm's length. And I realized that somewhere during those years of patient love and quiet persistence, she had become my daughter in every way that mattered. Not because of biology or legal documents, but because love had grown in the spaces between rejection and acceptance, in the quiet moments when she thought no one was watching. In the gradual recognition that family is something you choose to build rather than something you're born into. Yes, I said simply. I would do that. You are family, Megan. You've been family since the day I fell in love with your father. Blood doesn't make family. Love makes family. And I love you. Dr. Morrison looked between all of us and nodded slowly. We can certainly test you, Jennifer. Living donor evaluation is extensive and involves multiple medical and psychological assessments, but if you're serious about this, we can begin the process. The testing process began immediately and was more comprehensive than anything I'd ever experienced. Medical blood work to determine compatibility, imaging studies of my kidneys, cardiovascular evaluations, psychological assessments, to ensure I understood the risks and was making an informed decision, and consultations with multiple specialists who needed to clear me for major surgery. During the 2 weeks it took to complete all the donor evaluation tests, something beautiful began happening in our family. The crisis had forced us all to confront what really mattered, and the artificial barriers that had divided us for 3 years started crumbling. Megan began talking to me with an openness that was completely new. She told me about her fears regarding the kidney disease, her worries about how it might affect her volleyball career and college plans, and her guilt about the impact her illness was having on the entire family. She also, for the first time, began asking me questions about my own life, my childhood, my relationship with Carlos, and what it had been like trying to find my place in their family. I made it really hard for you, didn't I? She asked one afternoon while we waited for her to have another round of blood work done. You were protecting yourself, I replied. That's what smart kids do when their world has been turned upside down. You had no way of knowing that I wasn't going anywhere, but you didn't give up on us. Even when I was awful to you, even when I said those terrible things about you not being real family, you just kept loving Dad and being patient with me and Diego. Why? It was a question I'd asked myself many times over the past 3 years, especially during the darkest moments when Megan's rejection felt like too much to bear. Because I could see who you really were underneath all that protective armor. I said honestly, I could see that you were smart and loyal and fierce about protecting the people you love. Those are amazing qualities, even when they were being directed against me. I knew that if you ever decided to let me in, you would love just as fiercely as you had been rejecting. Diego, who had been quietly observing the changes in our family dynamic, began opening up to me as well. His kidney function tests had come back normal, which was an enormous relief, but the experience of potentially losing his sister had shaken him profoundly. He started seeking comfort from me when he was worried about Megan, asking questions about the medical procedures she was undergoing, and even requesting my help with homework for the first time in 3 years. Are you really going to give Megan one of your kidneys? He asked me one evening while Carlos was at the hospital with Megan for another consultation. If I'm medically able to and if it's what she needs, then yes, absolutely. Diego considered this for a long moment. That's a really big deal, isn't it? Like surgery and everything. It is a big deal, I agreed. But Megan is worth it. You and Megan are the most important people in your dad's life, which makes you the most important people in my life too. Even though we've been mean to you. I pulled Diego into a hug, the first one he'd ever willingly accepted from, especially because you've been protecting your family. That shows me what good hearts you both have. The call from Dr. Morrison came on a Friday afternoon while I was working in my home office, and Megan was at the hospital for what had become her twice-weekly monitoring appointment. My phone rang with the hospital's number, and I answered with the mixture of hope and terror that had become my default emotional state. "Jennifer, this is Dr. Morrison. I have the results of your donor compatibility testing, and I wanted to speak with you before we discuss this with the family." My heart stopped. "Okay, what did you find?" "Jennifer, you're not just compatible with Megan as a kidney donor, you're what we call a perfect match. 6 out of 6 compatibility markers, which is extraordinarily rare even among biological siblings. Your blood type, tissue typing, and cross-match results are all ideal. From a medical standpoint, you couldn't be a better donor for Megan if you were her identical twin." I sat in stunned silence, trying to process this information. Perfect match. 6 out of 6, better than biological sibling. "What does this mean exactly?" I asked. "It means that if you choose to proceed with donation, Megan's chances of accepting your kidney and having a successful long-term outcome are as good as they could possibly be. It also means that we can schedule the surgery relatively quickly rather than waiting for her condition to deteriorate further." After I hung up the phone, I sat in my office for a long time, staring out the window at the desert landscape that had become home. 3 years ago, I never could have imagined that I would be preparing to undergo major surgery to save the life of a stepdaughter who had spent those 3 years insisting I would never be her real mother. But as I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment, I realized that this was exactly where I was supposed to be. Not because of some grand romantic notion about step-family relationships, but because sometimes love grows slowly, in the spaces between rejection and acceptance, watered by patience and tended by faith that someday somehow, the barriers will come down. When Carlos and Megan returned from the hospital that evening, I was waiting for them in the living room, with news that would change all of our lives forever. The weight of Dr. Morrison's words settled around me like a mantle as I waited for Carlos and Megan to return from the hospital. Perfect match. 6 out of 6 compatibility markers, better odds than biological sibling. The medical miracle felt almost too good to be true, and yet it also felt like something that had been destined to happen all along, as if the universe had been quietly orchestrating this moment through 3 years of rejection, patience, and gradual understanding. I had spent the afternoon researching kidney donation surgery, reading medical journals, and trying to understand exactly what I was volunteering for. The procedure itself was major abdominal surgery, requiring several small incisions and the removal of one complete kidney. Recovery would take 6 to 8 weeks, during which I wouldn't be able to lift anything heavier than 10 pounds or engage in any strenuous physical activity. There were risks as with any surgery, but the long-term prognosis for kidney donors was excellent, with most people living completely normal lives with their remaining kidney. What struck me most about the research was how routine the procedure had become. Thousands of people donated kidneys to family members, friends, and even strangers every year. It was a gift that cost the donor very little in terms of long-term health impact, but could literally save the recipient's life. The more I learned, the more convinced I became that this was not just something I wanted to do, but something I needed to do. When I heard Carlos's truck pull into the driveway, my heart began racing with anticipation and nervousness. How would I tell them? How would Megan react to learning that not only could I donate a kidney to her, but that I was the best possible match she could hope for? How would Carlos feel about his fiancée undergoing major surgery for his daughter? They came through the front door together, and I could immediately see that it had been a difficult day at the hospital. Megan looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes that seemed to be getting more pronounced each week. Carlos looked stressed and worn down by the constant worry that had become his new normal since Megan's diagnosis. "How did the appointment go?" I asked, getting up from the couch where I'd been sitting with my laptop and research material. "More blood work, more tests, more waiting," Megan said, dropping her backpack by the door and heading toward the kitchen. "Morrison wants to start me on some new medications to help protect my remaining kidney function, but she also said we need to start seriously discussing transplant options, because my numbers keep getting worse." Carlos rubbed his temples, a gesture that had become habitual over the past few weeks. The nephrologist at Phoenix Children's Hospital wants a second opinion on the timeline. They're concerned that Megan's kidney function is declining faster than they initially expected. This was exactly the opening I needed. Actually, I have some news about that. Dr. Morrison called me this afternoon with the results of my donor compatibility testing. Both Carlos and Megan stopped what they were doing and turned to look at me with expressions of hope mixed with fear. I could see in their faces that they wanted desperately for me to be compatible, but they were also terrified of another disappointment if the tests had ruled me out as a potential donor. And, Carlos asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm a perfect match, I said, unable to keep the smile off my face. 6 out of 6 compatibility markers, Dr. Morrison said. My tissue typing couldn't be better if I were Megan's identical twin. The silence that followed my announcement was profound. Megan sank into one of the kitchen chairs, staring at me with an expression of complete shock. Carlos looked like he might cry, and I could see him processing what this meant, not just for Megan's health, but for our entire family. Perfect match, Megan repeated, as if she couldn't quite believe what she'd heard. Like, really perfect, I confirmed. Dr. Morrison said, that matches this good are extraordinarily rare, even among biological family members. Your body should accept my kidney as if it belonged there all along. Carlos crossed the kitchen in 2 strides and pulled me into a fierce hug, holding me so tightly I could feel his heart pounding against my chest. Jennifer, I can't believe this. I can't believe you're willing to do this for us. For her, I corrected gently, looking over his shoulder at Megan, who was still sitting in stunned silence. I'm doing this for her. When Carlos finally released me, I walked over to where Megan was sitting and knelt down beside her chair so we were at eye level. She looked so young in that moment, despite being 15 and taller than me. The tough, defiant teenager who had spent 3 years keeping me at arm's length had been replaced by a frightened child who was trying to process the possibility that her health crisis might actually have a solution. Megan, I said softly, I want you to know that this is my choice. No one is pressuring me to do this, and you don't need to feel guilty or obligated about it. I'm offering because I love you, and because I want you to have the best possible chance at a healthy, normal life. Tears started flowing down Megan's cheeks, and for the first time since I'd known her, she didn't try to hide her emotions or maintain her composure. But what if something goes wrong? What if the surgery doesn't work? Or what if something happens to you because of me? I reached over and took her hands in mine, noticing how cold her fingers were. The doctors have explained all the risks to me, and they're very small. Kidney donation is a routine procedure now, and people who donate kidneys typically live completely normal, healthy lives afterward. The risk to me is minimal, but the benefit to you is enormous. I don't understand why you would do this, Megan said, her voice breaking. I've been horrible to you for 3 years. I said awful things about you not being real family. I tried to make you feel unwelcome in your own home. Why would you risk surgery and give me part of your body after all of that? It was the question I'd been asking myself since the moment I volunteered to be tested, and I'd finally found an answer that felt true and complete. Because despite everything you said and did to keep me away, I fell in love with you anyway. I said honestly, I fell in love with your fierce loyalty to your family. I fell in love with your intelligence and your determination and your strength. I fell in love with the way you protect the people you care about, even when that meant protecting them from me. Those are incredible qualities, Megan, and they made me love you even when you wouldn't let me show it. Megan was crying harder now, and I could see years of guilt and fear and confusion finally beginning to break down. I was so scared that if I let myself care about you, you would leave like everything else good in my life seemed to leave. It felt safer to just keep you away. I understand that, I said, but I'm not going anywhere. I love your father, and I love you and Diego. You're stuck with me, whether you like it or not. For the first time in 3 years, Megan smiled at me through her tears. I think I might actually like it. The following weeks were a whirlwind of medical preparations, family discussions, and emotional processing, as we all adjusted to the reality that we were moving forward with a living donor kidney transplant. Morrison scheduled the surgery for 6 weeks out, which would give both Megan and me time to complete additional medical evaluations and prepare physically and mentally for the procedure. The news of my compatibility and our decision to proceed with the transplant had an immediate and profound impact on our family dynamics. Suddenly, the artificial barriers that had existed between us for 3 years seemed not just unnecessary but almost absurd. We were facing a major medical procedure together, and there was no room for the petty conflicts that had previously defined our relationship. Megan began seeking me out for conversations about everything from her fears about the surgery to her college plans, to her complicated feelings about having spent so many years rejecting someone who was now literally going to save her life. These talks usually happened in the evening, after Carlos had gone to bed, and they gave us a chance to really get to know each other for the first time. "Can I ask you something?" Megan said one night as we sat together on the back patio, watching the stars emerge in the clear Arizona sky. "Of course. When you and Dad first started dating, what did you think about me and Diego? Were we part of what attracted you to him, or were we just something you had to deal with to be with him?" It was a perceptive question that got to the heart of many step-family complications. I thought carefully about my answer because I wanted to be completely honest with her. "At first, I'll admit that you and Diego felt like a challenge I needed to figure out how to navigate," I said. "I loved your dad so much, and I could see how much he loved you too, so I knew that any future we had together would have to include building relationships with you, but I didn't really understand what that meant, or how complicated it would be." "When did that change?" "Honestly, it changed gradually over lots of small moments. The first time I saw you play volleyball and watched how hard you worked and how much you cared about your team, the time Diego got hurt at school and I saw how protective you were of him, the way you both talked about your mom with such love and respect, even though your parents' divorce had been painful. I started realizing that you weren't obstacles to my relationship with your dad. You were incredible people in your own right, and getting to know you would actually make my life richer." Megan was quiet for a while, processing. "I think I was afraid that if I let myself like you, it would somehow mean I didn't love Mom enough, or that I was betraying her in some way." "Did you ever talk to your mom about those feelings?" "Not really. I didn't want to hurt her feelings by admitting that I was even considering accepting you as part of our family." This conversation led to what turned out to be one of the most important developments in our preparation for surgery. Megan decided that she wanted to have an honest conversation with Isabella about her changing feelings toward me and her guilt about accepting my kidney donation. Isabella's response surprised everyone, including Meg. When Megan called her mother and tearfully confessed that she was starting to care about me and felt guilty about it, Isabella's reaction was immediate and supportive. "Megan, sweetheart, you don't need to choose between loving me and accepting Jennifer," Isabella said over the phone loud enough for me to hear from across the room. "I've been watching her for 3 years, and she's been nothing but patient and kind to you, even when you made it very difficult for her. The fact that she's willing to donate a kidney to save your life tells me everything I need to know about her character. But doesn't it bother you that I'm starting to think of her as family? That I might even start calling her Mom sometimes?" Isabella's answer made me tear up as I listened from the kitchen where I was pretending to clean up dinner dishes. "Baby girl, you having more people who love you doesn't diminish my love for you or your love for me. Jennifer loving you enough to give you a kidney doesn't make me less your mother. It just makes you luckier because you have more people in your corner." That conversation opened the door for Isabella and me to have our first real heart-to-heart talk about co-parenting and our shared love for Megan and Diego. She called me the next day and asked if we could meet for coffee, just the two of us. "I owe you an apology," Isabella said after we'd ordered our drinks at a quiet cafe in Scottsdale. "I've been polite to you for 3 years, but I haven't been welcoming. I was threatened by you, if I'm being honest. Threatened by how much Carlos loved you. Threatened by the possibility that my children might love you too." Her honesty surprised me. "I can understand that. It must be complicated to see your ex-husband with someone new, especially someone who's going to be involved in raising your children." "It is complicated, but that's not your fault or your problem to solve. What you're doing for Megan, offering to donate your kidney, it's extraordinary. It's the kind of love that I would hope any mother would have for her child. And the fact that you're willing to show that love for my daughter tells me that I've been wrong to see you as a threat." We talked for nearly 2 hours that afternoon, and by the end of our conversation, I felt like we had laid the foundation for a real co-parenting partnership, based on mutual respect and shared priorities for the children's well-being. "I want you to know," Isabella said as we were getting ready to leave,
that from now on when Megan and Diego talk about their family, I'm going to make sure they know that includes you too. You've earned that place, and they deserve to feel like they can love you without guilt or divided loyalties. Meanwhile, Carlos was processing his own complex emotions about the upcoming surgery. While he was overwhelmingly grateful for my willingness to donate, he was also struggling with fear about the risks I would be taking and guilt about the fact that he couldn't be Megan's donor himself. I should be the one doing this, he said one night, as we lay in bed, unable to sleep, due to anxiety about the surgery that was now just 3 weeks away. She's my daughter, I should be the one taking the risks to save her life. Carlos, you would do this in a heartbeat if you were medically able to, I said, turning to face him in the darkness. The fact that your blood pressure makes you a poor surgical candidate doesn't diminish your love for Megan or your commitment to her health. You're doing everything you can as her father, but you're doing more than I can do, and you're not even her biological parent. How does that make any sense? I understood his struggle because it highlighted the complex dynamics of blended families and the arbitrary nature of biological relationships. When it comes to love and sacrifice, it makes sense because love isn't limited by biology. I said, you and Isabella created Megan, but that doesn't mean you're the only people capable of loving her enough to make sacrifices for her well-being. I chose to love her, and that choice makes my love just as real and just as strong as yours. As the surgery date approached, we decided to have a family meeting to discuss logistics, expectations, and everyone's concerns about the procedure. Dr. Morrison had recommended this kind of conversation to ensure that everyone understood what to expect and felt supported throughout the process. We gathered in our living room on a Sunday afternoon. Carlos, Megan, Diego, and me. Isabella had offered to join us, but we decided to keep this conversation to our immediate household, and then fill her in separately. Okay, Carlos said, taking on his role as family facilitator. Morrison wants us to talk through everyone's fears and concerns about the surgery so that we're all prepared and supporting each other. Diego, who had been quietly worried about both his sister and me, spoke up first. What if something goes wrong? What if the surgery doesn't work, or what if Jennifer gets hurt? It was a fair question that deserved a thorough answer. The doctors have explained all the risks to us, I said. For me, the biggest risk is the general anesthesia, and the normal surgical risks like infection or bleeding. But kidney donation has been done thousands of times, and the vast majority of donors recover completely and live normal lives afterward. What about for Megan? Diego asked. Megan answered this one herself. For me, the risks are a little higher because I'm receiving the kidney, but Morrison said that because Jennifer is such a perfect match, my chances of rejecting the kidney are very low. I'll have to take anti-rejection medications for the rest of my life, but lots of people do that and live completely normal lives. Carlos addressed the timeline and recovery expectation. The surgery will take most of the day. Jennifer and Megan will both be in the hospital for about a week afterward, and then we'll all need to be very careful about infections and follow-up care for several months. What can I do to help?
Diego asked, and I could see how much he wanted to feel useful and included in his sister's care. You can help me take care of Jennifer while she's recovering, Megan said, reaching over to squeeze her brother's hand. And you can help Dad with all the extra driving and errands while we're both healing. We talked through practical concerns like school schedules, work arrangements, and household responsibilities during our recovery period. Carlos had arranged to take extended time off from his clinic, and I had handed off my current client projects to colleagues who could cover for me during my 6-week recovery period. But the most important part of our family meeting was when Megan asked to speak directly to me about her feelings regarding the surgery. Jennifer, I need you to know that I understand the magnitude of what you're doing for me, she said, her voice steady but emotional. You're having major surgery and giving me a piece of your body to save my life. I can never repay that debt, and I can never fully express how grateful I am. Megan, I interrupted gently, there's no debt. That's not how family love works. You don't owe me anything for this. But I do want to promise you something, she continued. I promise that I'll take care of your kidney like it's the most precious gift I've ever received, because it is. I'll take all my medications exactly as prescribed. I'll go to all my follow-up appointments, and I'll do everything I can to make sure that your sacrifice gives me the healthiest, longest life possible. And I want to promise you something too, Megan said, looking directly into my eyes. I promise that from now on, you'll never have to question whether you're part of this family. You'll never have to wonder if I accept you or love you. You've proven that you're my family in the most profound way possible, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that I'm yours too. It was in that moment, sitting in our living room 3 weeks before surgery, that I finally felt like the family I'd been dreaming of for 3 years had actually come into existence. Not because of the kidney donation itself, but because the crisis had forced all of us to strip away the artificial barriers and defenses that had kept us from truly connecting with each other. The final weeks before surgery were filled with medical appointments, preoperative preparations, and a sense of anticipation that felt both exciting and terrifying. Megan and I underwent final compatibility testing, surgical planning consultations, and meetings with the transplant coordinator who would oversee our care. Dr. Morrison remained optimistic about our prognosis. "I've rarely seen compatibility results as good as yours," she told us during our final preoperative meeting. Megan's body should accept Jennifer's kidney as if it had always belonged there. "We're looking at excellent long-term outcomes for both of you." The night before surgery, our entire extended family gathered at our house for what had become an impromptu celebration and blessing ceremony. Isabella and her husband Michael came over, along with Carlos's parents, his sister Maria, and even my own parents, who had flown in from Colorado to be with us during the surgery. It was the first time our whole blended, complicated, beautiful family had been together in one place, and seeing everyone united in their support for Megan and their gratitude for what I was doing felt like the culmination of 3 years of patient relationship building. "I want to say something," Megan announced after dinner, standing up in our crowded living room to address the group. "3 years ago, when Jennifer first came into our family, I did everything I could to make her feel unwelcome. I was cruel and rejecting and tried to convince everyone that she would never be real family." She paused, looking around the room at all the faces of people who loved her. "I was wrong about everything. Jennifer didn't become real family when she offered to donate her kidney to save my life. She became real family through 3 years of loving me when I wouldn't let myself be loved, supporting my dad when I was being difficult, and showing all of us what unconditional love actually looks like." Megan turned to face me direct. "Tomorrow you're going to give me one of your kidneys, but you've already given me something just as valuable. You've taught me what it means to choose family, to choose love, and to choose sacrifice for people you care about. I love you, Mom Jennifer, and I'm proud to be your daughter." There wasn't a dry eye in the house, including mine. After 3 years of patient waiting, I had finally heard the word I'd dreamed of hearing. "Mom." The morning of surgery arrived with the kind of spectacular Arizona sunrise that makes you believe in possibility. I woke up at 4:30 a.m., not because of my alarm but because my body had been too anxious to sleep deeply. Carlos was already awake beside me, staring at the ceiling with the expression of a man trying to memorize every detail of a moment that would change everything. "How are you feeling?" he asked quietly, turning to face me in the pre-dawn darkness. "Scared and excited and grateful all at the same time," I answered honestly, like I'm about to do the most important thing I've ever done in my life. We had to be at Banner University Medical Center, Phoenix by 6 a.m. for preoperative preparations. The surgery was scheduled for 8 o'clock, with Dr. Morrison leading the team that would remove my kidney and Dr. Patricia Valdez, the transplant surgeon, handling Megan's procedure. The coordinated surgery would take approximately 6 to 8 hours total, with both procedures happening simultaneously in adjoining operating room. Megan had stayed at Isabella's house the night before so she could follow her own preoperative routine without the added stress of seeing my anxiety. We would meet at the hospital, where our entire support system would be gathering to wait through what promised to be a very long day. The drive to the hospital was mostly silent, with Carlos holding my hand while navigating the early morning Phoenix traffic. I found myself thinking about the journey that had brought us to this moment. 3 years of rejection and patience, crisis and breakthrough, fear and love, all culminating in this one act of ultimate trust and sacrifice. When we arrived at the surgical center, Megan was already there with Isabella, looking small and nervous in her hospital gown. The sight of her sitting on the edge of a hospital bed, IV already in place, made my heart clench with protective love. This brave 15-year-old was about to undergo major surgery to receive an organ from my body, and the magnitude of that reality hit me anew. "How are you doing, sweetheart?" I asked, going directly to her bedside and taking her free hand. "Better now that you're here," she said with a smile that was equal parts gratitude and terror. "I keep thinking about how crazy this is, that we went from barely speaking to you literally saving my life." "It's not crazy," I said firmly. "It's love. Sometimes love takes time to find its way through all the barriers we put up, but when it does, it's capable of extraordinary things." Dr. Morrison arrived shortly after we did, along with Dr. Valdez and the entire surgical team. They walked us through the final preparations, answered last-minute questions, and reviewed the timeline for the day. Both Megan and I would be taken into preoperative areas, simultaneously, undergo anesthesia, and then the surgeries would begin. "Jennifer, are you ready for this?" Dr. Morrison asked during our final consultation. "I've never been more ready for anything in my life," I answered without hesitation. The preoperative area was a controlled environment of medical efficiency and quiet conversation. I was given my own hospital gown, IV line, and pre-medication to help calm my nerves. The reality of what was about to happen became increasingly concrete as nurses checked my vital signs, verified my identity multiple times, and prepared me for surgery. Carlos stayed with me until the very last moment, when the anesthesiologist arrived to wheel me into the operating room. Our goodbye was emotional but brief. Too much sentiment would have made it harder for both of us to get through the day. "I love you," he said, kissing my forehead. "Thank you for giving our daughter this chance. Take care of her while I'm sleeping," I replied. "And don't worry about me, I'm going to be fine." The operating room was exactly what I'd expected from medical television shows: bright lights, sophisticated equipment, and a team of professionals who moved with practiced efficiency. Morrison introduced me to the surgical team, and the anesthesiologist explained what to expect as I drifted off to sleep. "Count backward from 10, she instructed as the medication began flowing through my IV. 10, 9, 8, I managed before the world faded to black. The next thing I was aware of was waking up in the recovery room several hours later, feeling groggy and disoriented, but surprisingly free of pain, thanks to the surgical medications. A recovery nurse named Maria was checking my vital signs and monitoring my incision size. "Welcome back, Jennifer," she said with a warm smile. "Your surgery went perfectly. Dr. Morrison said your kidney was beautiful and healthy, and it's already been successfully transplanted into Megan." "How is she?" I asked, my voice hoarse from the breathing tube that had been removed. "She's still in surgery, but everything is going exactly according to plan. Dr. Valdez expects to be finished within the hour." The first few hours of recovery were a blur of medical monitoring, pain management, and gradual awakening from anesthesia. Carlos was allowed to visit me briefly in the recovery room, and his relief at seeing me awake and alert was palpable. "How do you feel?" he asked, carefully taking my hand to avoid disturbing the IV lines. "Like I've been cut open and had an organ removed," I said with a weak laugh. "But also like I've done something really important." "How's Megan?" "Still in surgery, but Dr. Valdez sent word that everything is proceeding beautifully. Your kidney started producing urine immediately after being connected, which they said is the best possible sign." Over the next several hours, as I gradually became more alert and comfortable, our family and friends began arriving to check on both Megan and me. Isabella came to thank me personally, tears streaming down her face as she tried to express gratitude that felt too large for words. "I don't know how to thank you for what you've done," she said, sitting carefully beside my hospital bed. "You've given my daughter her life back." "You don't need to thank me," I replied. "She's my daughter too now. This is what mothers do for their children." The moment when I was finally allowed to see Megan was the culmination of everything we'd been working toward. She was in her own recovery room, still groggy from anesthesia but awake and smiling. The immediate change in her appearance was remarkable. Already, just hours after surgery, she had more color in her cheeks than I'd seen since her diagnosis. "Hi, Mom," she said when she saw me being wheeled into her room in my own wheelchair. It was the first time she'd called me Mom without any qualifier, and the word hit me like a physical embrace. "Hi, baby girl. How are you feeling?" "Different. Good different. Like my body remembers how to work properly again." She reached over to take my hand, careful not to disturb either of our IV lines. Your kidney is working perfectly, Dr. Valdez said. It started functioning immediately, like it was meant to be there all along. It was meant to be there, I said, squeezing her hand gently. We're family. My kidney knows where it belongs. The recovery process over the following week was challenging but filled with moments of profound connection and healing that went far beyond the physical. Megan and I were in rooms across the hall from each other, which meant we could visit easily and support each other through the discomfort and gradual healing. Diego was a constant presence, splitting his time between both our rooms and appointed himself our chief entertainment coordinator. He brought us magazines, helped us with video calls to friends and extended family, and kept us updated on all the hospital gossip he'd picked up from the nursing staff. The nurses on this floor say you guys are the most positive transplant patients they've ever had, he reported during one of his visits. They keep talking about how you're always smiling and how Megan lights up every time you come to visit her. That's because we're happy, Megan explained to her brother. We've been waiting 3 years to really be a family, and now we finally are. Carlos practically lived at the hospital during our recovery week, sleeping in uncomfortable chair beds, and coordinating between both our medical needs. Watching him care for both of us with such devotion and tenderness made me fall in love with him all over again. Isabella visited daily as well, and the dynamic between all of us had shifted into something I'd never quite imagined possible. There was no competition or territorial behavior, just a group of adults united in their love for Megan and their gratitude for her successful surgery. You know what's interesting? Isabella said during one of our conversations while Megan was napping. I spent 3 years worrying that my children loving you would somehow diminish their love for me, but watching how Megan has blossomed since accepting you into her heart, I realized that love doesn't work that way. Having more people who love her has just made her more capable of loving every. Dr. Morrison was thrilled with both our recoveries. My kidney function tests showed that my remaining kidney was adapting perfectly to handling the full workload, and Megan's tests indicated that my donated kidney was functioning at optimal levels with no signs of rejection. This is exactly the outcome we hoped for, Dr. Morrison told us during one of our joint consultations. Jennifer, your recovery is textbook perfect. Megan, your body has accepted the kidney beautifully, and your overall health markers are the best they've been since your diagnosis. The day we were both cleared to go home was emotional and celebratory. Our entire extended family gathered in Megan's hospital room for an impromptu party, complete with balloons and a cake that Diego had somehow convinced the hospital cafeteria to make for us. I want to say something, Megan announced to the assembled group. 6 months ago I was scared that I might die from kidney disease. 3 months ago I was scared that I might spend years on dialysis waiting for a transplant. But today, I'm going home healthy, because someone who I spent 3 years pushing away, loved me enough to literally give me part of herself. She turned to look directly at me. Jennifer, you didn't just save my life with your kidney. You saved our whole family by showing us what real unconditional love looks like. You taught me that family isn't about biology or legal documents. It's about choosing to love someone even when they make it difficult and choosing to sacrifice for someone because their well-being matters more than your own comfort. The months following our surgery were a period of adjustment, healing, and deepening relationships that felt like the natural continuation of the transformation that had begun in the hospital. Both Megan and I followed strict medical protocols for monitoring our recovery, but our focus was increasingly on rebuilding our normal lives with our new family dynamic. Megan returned to school 6 weeks after surgery, and the change in her energy level and overall health was remarkable. Her teachers commented on how much more engaged and alert she seemed in classes. Her volleyball coach was amazed by her renewed strength and endurance during practices. It's like getting the old Megan back, but better, Diego observed one evening, as we watched his sister effortlessly help him with a challenging math assignment. She's stronger than she was before she got sick. My own recovery progressed smoothly, and I was able to return to work and normal activities within 8 weeks of surgery. The physical healing was relatively straightforward, but the emotional and relational healing continued to unfold in beautiful and unexpected ways. Megan began actively including me in conversations about her future plans, seeking my advice about college applications and career goals. She started traditions like weekly mother-daughter shopping trips and asked me to help her learn to cook some of my favorite recipes. "I want to know everything about you," she said one Saturday afternoon as we worked together in the kitchen, making homemade pasta from scratch. "I wasted 3 years not getting to know you, and I don't want to waste any more time." Diego, not to be outdone by his sister's transformation, began openly referring to me as his stepmom and including me in school events and activities where parental involvement was expected. He asked me to help coach his soccer team when they needed additional volunteers, and he started coming to me for advice about friend drama and school challenges. "You're really good at listening," he told me one evening after I'd helped him work through a conflict with a classmate. "Like you listen to understand, not just to give advice." Mom Isabella is good at that too, but it's nice to have two moms who really get it. Carlos watched these developments with joy and amazement, frequently commenting on how different our household felt now that the barriers had finally come down completely. "It's like we're finally the family I always dreamed we could be," he said one night as we sat on our back patio, watching Megan and Diego play with our neighbor's dog in the yard. "I knew you loved them and I hoped they would eventually love you back, but I never imagined it would be this natural and complete." 6 months after our surgery, we decided to mark the anniversary with a family celebration that would acknowledge how far we'd all come. We planned a weekend camping trip to Sedona, something we'd never attempted as a family because the dynamics had been too tense and complicated. The trip was magical in ways that exceeded all our expectations. We hiked together through Red Rock canyons, cooked meals over a camp stove, and spent hours talking around the campfire about everything from Megan's college plans, to Diego's aspirations, to play soccer in high school. On our last night camping, as we sat around the dying fire looking up at stars that were brilliant in the clear desert sky, Megan made an announcement that surprised all of us. "I've decided what I want to study in college," "I want to become a transplant coordinator like the nurses who took care of us during surgery. I want to help other families navigate organ donation and transplant." "That's a beautiful choice," Isabella said, having joined us for the camping trip as part of our new extended family traditions. "You'd be amazing at helping other people through what we went through." "I think going through this experience gave me a perspective that could really help other families," Megan continued. "I understand what it's like to be scared about your health, and I understand how complicated family dynamics can make medical decisions even harder. But I also understand how much healing can happen when people choose to love each other through difficult circumstances." She looked directly at me across the fire. "And I want to tell other kids in blended families that sometimes the people who aren't biologically related to you can love you just as much as the people who are. Sometimes they can love you enough to give you a kidney." 1 year after our surgery, Megan and I went together for our annual follow-up appointments with Dr. Morrison. Both our test results were perfect. My remaining kidney was functioning beautifully, and Megan's transplanted kidney was thriving with no signs of rejection or complication. "This is exactly what we hope to see in transplant recipients and donors," Dr. Morrison told us during our joint consultation. "Megan, your kidney function is now completely normal for someone your age. Jennifer, your recovery has been exemplary, and you should expect to live a completely normal, healthy life with your remaining kidney." As we left the medical center that day, walking together in the Arizona sunshine, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. 3 years earlier, I could never have imagined that the hostile teenager who had spent so much energy rejecting me would become the daughter who now sought my advice, shared her dreams with me, and proudly introduced me to her friends as her mom. "Do you ever regret it?" Megan asked as we drove home from our appointments. "Giving up your kidney for someone who had been so mean to you?" "Never," I said without hesitation, "not for a single second. Loving you and Diego and your dad has been the greatest privilege of my life." The kidney donation wasn't a sacrifice, it was a gift I got to give to someone I love. "I want you to know that I think about it every day," Megan said seriously. "Every morning when I wake up feeling healthy and strong, I remember that it's because of your kidney. Every time I play volleyball or run up the stairs without getting tired, I remember that you made that possible. I'll never take it for granted." "Good," I said, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "But I also want you to live your life fully and freely, not like you owe me something."
The kidney was a gift, which means there are no strings attached and no debt to repay. Just live the best life you can and be happy. Today, as I'm sharing this story, it's been 3 years since our surgery. Megan is now 18 and a senior in high school, preparing to start college in the fall with plans to study healthcare administration and eventually become a transplant coordinator. She's healthy, confident, and thriving in ways that sometimes take my breath away. Diego is 16 and has grown into a thoughtful, caring young man who never hesitates to tell people that he has 2 moms who both love him completely. He's become an advocate for organ donation awareness and frequently speaks at school assemblies about our family's experience. Carlos and I got married 2 years ago in a ceremony where both Megan and Diego participated as official family representatives, reading vows about our commitment to loving and supporting each other through whatever challenges life might bring. Megan gave a speech at our reception about how our family had taught her that love is a choice you make every day, not just a feeling you have. Isabella remains an important part of our extended family, and we've developed a co-parenting relationship based on mutual respect and shared commitment to the children's well-being. She often tells people that watching me love her children taught her important lessons about the expansive nature of family love. The most profound lesson I've learned from this experience is that family is something you build through time, patience, and countless small acts of love and sacrifice. Biology can give you a starting point, but it can't give you the deep bonds that come from choosing to love someone through their worst moments and their best ones. I've learned that sometimes the people who fight your love the hardest are the ones who need it the most, and that persistence and patience can break through barriers that seemed insurmountable. I've learned that sacrifice for someone you love doesn't feel like sacrifice, it feels like privilege. Most importantly, I've learned that giving someone your kidney is actually the easy part. The hard part is the 3 years of quiet love, consistent presence, and unwavering commitment that came before the surgery. The hard part is loving someone who isn't ready to love you back yet, and trusting that someday somehow, your patience will be rewarded. When people ask me for advice about step-parenting or blended families, I tell them this: love is not a finite resource. A child loving you doesn't diminish their love for their biological parent. Your love for them doesn't have to compete with anyone else's love. There's room in every heart for multiple people to be family, and there's room in every family for love to grow in unexpected directions. I tell them to be patient, to be consistent, and to love without expecting immediate returns on their investment. I tell them that sometimes the greatest love stories are the ones that take years to unfold, and that sometimes the words, "I love you too," are worth waiting 3 years to hear. And I tell them that if you're ever lucky enough to find yourself in a position to save someone's life, whether through organ donation or any other kind of sacrifice, you should do it without hesitation, because there's no greater privilege than being able to give life to someone you love. Megan was right when she said I'd never be her real mom, at least, not in the biological sense. But I became something even better. I became her chosen mom, the person who loved her enough to give her part of my body, so she could live her best life. And in return, she gave me the gift of being called mom by someone who truly meant it, someone who chose to love me back after years of choosing not to. That's a trade I'd make again in a heartbeat. The call came on a Thursday afternoon while I was reviewing marketing proposals for a new client in my home office. It had been 5 years since the transplant surgery, and our lives had settled into a rhythm so natural that it was hard to remember the years of struggle that preceded. Megan was now 20, halfway through her junior year at Arizona State University studying healthcare administration, and our relationship had evolved into something deeper and more authentic than I ever could have imagined possible. "Mom, Jennifer," Megan's voice came through my phone with an excitement I hadn't heard since she'd been accepted to college. "You're not going to believe what just happened. Remember that research project I've been working on about long-term outcomes in pediatric kidney transplant recipients?" I smiled at how naturally the title Mom Jennifer rolled off her tongue now. It had become her way of distinguishing me from Isabella when talking to friends and professors, but also her way of claiming me fully as her mother while honoring the woman who had given birth to her. Of course I remember, you've been working on it for months. What happened? Professor Chen just called me into her office. The Children's Hospital Research Foundation wants to fund my project as a full study. Not just fund it, they want to expand it into a multi-year research initiative that could influence transplant protocols nationwide, and they want me to be the lead student researcher. I sat back in my desk chair overwhelmed with pride and amazement. Megan, that's incredible. Tell me everything. For the next 20 minutes, Megan explained how her research proposal, examining the psychological and social factors that contribute to successful long-term outcomes in young transplant recipients, had caught the attention of pediatric transplant specialists across the Southwest. Her unique perspective as both a transplant recipient and someone studying to work in the field had given her insights that professional researchers were finding invaluable. The thing is, Megan continued, her voice growing more serious, they want me to present the preliminary findings at the National Pediatric Transplant Conference in Denver next month. And they specifically asked if you would be willing to participate as a case study subject, representing the living donor perspective. The request took me by surprise. In the 5 years since our surgery, I had occasionally spoken to other families considering organ donation, usually referred by Dr. Morrison or the transplant coordinator at Banner. But presenting at a national medical conference felt like stepping into an entirely different arena. What would that involve exactly? You'd be part of a panel discussion about the long-term impact of living donation on family dynamics. They want to explore how organ donation between non-biological family members affects relationships, and whether there are factors that contribute to positive outcomes versus complications. I found myself thinking about how much our story could potentially help other families navigating similar journeys. Over the years, we'd been contacted by several step families dealing with medical crises, and I'd seen firsthand how rare our positive outcome actually was. Many blended families struggled with the complex emotions and loyalties that medical emergencies could trigger. I'd be honored to participate, I said without hesitation. If our experience can help other families, then absolutely. That evening, when Carlos came home from the clinic, I shared Megan's news and my agreement to participate in the conference. His reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. This is amazing, Jen.
Do you realize what this means? Our daughter has turned her medical experience into a career path that could help thousands of other kids. And you get to be part of sharing that knowledge with medical professionals who make these decisions every day. Diego, now 18 and a senior in high school, overheard our conversation and joined us in the kitchen where we were preparing dinner together, a family tradition that had become sacred in our household. Are you going to tell them about how weird our family used to be? He asked with the directness that characterized his communication style. Like how Megan hated Jennifer for 3 years before she was willing to accept a kidney from her. That's exactly what makes our story valuable, I replied, stirring the sauce for our chicken enchiladas. Most families dealing with medical crises don't have perfect relationships. Most stepfamilies have conflict and complications. If we can show that it's possible to work through those issues and build something beautiful, maybe other families won't give up so easily. Over the following weeks, as Megan and I prepared for the Denver conference, we spent hours reflecting on our journey and trying to identify the specific factors that had contributed to our eventual success. It was a process that required both of us to revisit some painful memories, but also to recognize patterns and choices that had ultimately led to healing. I think one of the most important things was that you never gave up on me, even when I was actively trying to push you away. Megan said during one of our preparation sessions, "You could have decided that I was too hostile and focused all your energy on building a relationship with Diego instead. Or you could have told Dad that his kids were making your life too difficult and forced him to choose between you and us." Those thoughts definitely crossed my mind during the hardest moments, I admit. But something inside me kept insisting that your rejection wasn't really about me personally. It was about your fear and your loyalty to your mom, and your need to feel in control of something during a time when your whole world had been turned upside down by your parents' divorce. That's exactly right, Megan agreed. I was terrified that if I let myself love you, it would somehow mean I was betraying mom, or that I was okay with my parents' marriage ending. It felt like accepting you would be giving up hope that my family could somehow go back to the way it was before. We talked about Isabella's role in our eventual success, particularly her decision to actively support Megan's changing relationship with me, rather than feeling threatened by it. This had been crucial because it gave Megan permission to love me without guilt or divided loyalty. I think a lot of biological parents struggle with that, Megan observed. They feel like their children loving a step-parent somehow diminishes the biological relationship. But Mom Isabella showed me that love isn't a competition. Having two mothers who both love me completely just makes me luckier, not more confused. We also discussed Carlos's patience and wisdom in refusing to force a relationship between me and his children. Rather than demanding that they accept me, or punishing them for their resistance, he had consistently modeled respect for me, while also validating their feelings about the family changes they were experiencing. Dad never made us feel guilty for not liking you at first, Megan said. He didn't threaten to spend less time with us or make us feel like we had to choose between having a relationship with him and rejecting you. That gave us the space to change our minds naturally instead of feeling cornered into fake acceptance. As we delved deeper into our analysis, I began to see how many small decisions and moments of patience had accumulated over 3 years to create the foundation for trust that made the kidney donation possible. It hadn't been one dramatic gesture that changed everything. It had been hundreds of tiny choices to respond with love instead of defensiveness, to show up consistently instead of withdrawing when things got difficult, and to keep believing in the possibility of connection even when there was no evidence that it would ever happen. The Denver conference was held at the Colorado Convention Center, and walking into the massive facility filled with transplant professionals from around the world felt surreal. Megan was presenting her research on the second day of the conference, and our panel discussion about family dynamics and living donation was scheduled for the final afternoon. Watching Megan present her research findings to an audience of doctors, nurses, social workers, and researchers was one of the proudest moments of my life. She spoke with confidence and authority about the psychological factors that contribute to successful transplant outcomes, drawing on both her personal experience and the academic research she'd been conducting. What we found, Megan told the audience, is that transplant recipients who have strong, supportive family relationships, regardless of whether those relationships are biological or chosen, have significantly better long-term outcomes than recipients who feel isolated or conflicted about their support system. She presented data showing that patients with positive step-family relationships had better medication compliance, fewer psychological complications, and higher overall satisfaction with their transplant experience compared to patients from families with ongoing conflict or instability. This suggests that the quality of family relationships matters more than the traditional structure of those relationships, Megan continued. A child who feels loved and supported by a step-parent may actually have better transplant outcomes than a child whose biological family is dysfunctional or unsupported. The questions from the audience were thoughtful and engaging, with several transplant coordinators asking for specific recommendations about how to assess and strengthen family dynamics during the evaluation process for living donation. One thing we've learned, Megan responded to a question about timing, is that medical crises can actually accelerate the resolution of family conflicts if the foundation of love is already there. My relationship with my stepmom improved dramatically during my transplant process, because the crisis forced us both to focus on what really mattered instead of getting stuck in old patterns of hurt and defensiveness. When it was time for our panel discussion, I found myself sitting on a stage with 2 other living donors, a transplant recipient and a family therapist who specialized in medical family dynamics. The moderator, Elizabeth Santos from Johns Hopkins, began by asking each of us to briefly share our story and perspective. When my turn came, I looked out at an audience of several hundred medical professionals and tried to distill 5 years of complex family evolution into a coherent narrative. My experience as a living kidney donor was unusual because I donated to my stepdaughter after 3 years of her actively rejecting me as a family member. When Megan was diagnosed with kidney disease, I volunteered to be tested as a donor not because we had a close relationship, but because I loved her father and believed that she deserved every possible chance at a healthy life regardless of her feelings about me personally. I described the testing process, the discovery that I was a perfect match, and the way that the transplant journey had transformed our entire family dynamic. What I learned is that love doesn't require reciprocation to be real and meaningful, I told the audience. I loved Megan for 3 years before she was ready to love me back, and that one-sided love was still valuable because it created the foundation of trust that made the donation possible. When she finally accepted my kidney, she wasn't just accepting an organ, she was accepting the love I'd been offering all along. The questions from the audience were more personal and challenging than I'd expected. A transplant coordinator from Seattle asked how we'd navigated the potential for resentment if Megan had continued to reject me even after accepting my kidney. That was definitely a risk we all recognized, I answered honestly, but I went into the donation process with clear expectations. I wasn't giving Megan my kidney in exchange for her love or acceptance. I was giving it to her because she needed it, and I could provide it. Any relationship changes that resulted were a bonus, not a requirement. A family therapist from Boston asked about the role of the biological mother in our success, noting that many blended families struggle with territorial feelings that can complicate medical decision-making. Isabella's support was absolutely crucial. She could have felt threatened by my involvement in Megan's medical care, or she could have made Megan feel guilty about accepting help from me. Instead, she actively encouraged Megan to accept my offer and consistently reinforced the message that having multiple people who love you is a blessing, not a betrayal. Dr. Santos asked what advice I would give to other stepparents who might find themselves in similar situations, facing medical crises with children who haven't fully accepted them. I thought carefully about my answer because I knew it might influence how medical professionals counseled other families in crisis. I would tell them to separate their decision about donation from their desire for relationship improvement. If you're considering donating to help a stepchild, do it because it's the right thing to do medically and ethically, not because you hope it will fix your family dynamic. The relationship healing that happened for us was wonderful, but it wasn't guaranteed, and it shouldn't be the primary motivation for such a serious medical decision. That said, I continued, I would also tell them not to underestimate the power of consistent, patient love to eventually break through even the strongest resistance. Megan spent 3 years trying to keep me at arm's length, but she was also watching and evaluating my character during that time. When the crisis came, she had 3 years of evidence that I was trustworthy, reliable, and genuinely committed to her father and their family. After the panel, several audience members approached me with questions about their own family situations, or to share stories of complicated medical decisions they'd witnessed in their professional practice. A transplant social worker from Phoenix told me that she'd started incorporating questions about step-family dynamics into her evaluation process after hearing our story. I realize now that I was probably missing important relationship factors that could influence transplant outcomes, she said. I was focused on assessing biological family support, but I wasn't really exploring the quality of relationships with stepparents or other chosen family members. The most meaningful conversation was with a transplant coordinator from Denver who told me that she'd been working with a family very similar to ours, a stepmother considering donating to a stepdaughter who had been resistant to their relationship. The family has been struggling with the decision because they're worried about the emotional complications if the donation doesn't improve their relationship, she explained. But hearing your perspective about separating the medical decision from the relationship goals, that's exactly what they need to hear. On the flight home from Denver, Megan and I processed the experience and its implications for both her research and our understanding of our own journey. I keep thinking about what you said about love not requiring reciprocation, Megan said as we waited for our connecting flight in Las Vegas. I think that was probably the key to everything that happened between us. You loved me consistently for 3 years without getting much positive feedback, and that consistency is what finally convinced me that your feelings were genuine. It's interesting how medical professionals responded to our story. I got the sense that many of them had seen families struggle with similar dynamics, but hadn't really thought systematically about how to address the relationship factors that influence medical outcomes. Megan nodded enthusiastic. That's exactly what I want to focus on in my graduate research. There's so much emphasis on medical compatibility and surgical success, but not enough attention to the psychological and social factors that determine whether families thrive or struggle after transplant. 6 months after the Denver conference, Megan received word that her research proposal had been approved for a major grant that would fund her graduate studies and allow her to expand her research into a multi-site study involving pediatric transplant centers across the country. The news came during one of our regular family dinners, and the celebration that followed felt like the culmination of everything we'd built together as a family. I want you to know, Megan said to me during a quiet moment, while Carlos and Diego were cleaning up the kitchen, that none of this would have been possible without your kidney, obviously, but also without the example you set about how to love someone through difficult circumstances. Watching you be patient with me for 3 years taught me more about real love than any of the psychology textbooks I've read in college. And watching you transform from a scared, defensive teenager into this confident, compassionate young woman has been the greatest privilege of my life, I replied. You've taught me that sometimes the most important relationships are the ones that require the most patience to develop. As I write this, Megan is now 22 and in her first year of graduate school, working toward a PhD in health psychology with a focus on pediatric transplant. Her research has already been published in 2 major medical journals, and she's been invited to speak at conferences around the world about family dynamics in organ donation. Diego is a sophomore at the University of Arizona, studying sports medicine and volunteering with organ donation awareness campaigns on campus. He frequently tells people that growing up in a blended family that worked through major medical challenges taught him important lessons about resilience, commitment, and the difference between biological family and chosen family. Carlos and I have been married for 6 years now, and our relationship has been strengthened by navigating the transplant experience together. We've become advocates for living donation and have spoken to dozens of families considering similar decisions. We've also become informal mentors to other blended families dealing with the complex emotions and logistics of creating new family structures after divorce. Isabella married her husband Michael 8 years ago, and they have a 2-year-old daughter named Sophia who calls me Tia Jennifer and considers me part of her extended family. Our relationships have evolved into something that resembles what researchers call collaborative co-parenting, where multiple adults work together in the best interests of the children without territorial competition or conflict. We have the weirdest, most wonderful family, Diego said recently when he was home for winter break. I have 2 moms who both love me completely, a dad who would do anything for us, a stepmom who literally gave up an organ to save my sister's life, and a baby sister who thinks our chaos is totally normal. How many people can say that? The most unexpected development has been the way our story has continued to influence other families long after our own crisis was resolved. Through social media, conference presentations, and word-of-mouth referrals, we've been contacted by hundreds of families dealing with similar challenges. Some are facing medical crises in blended families, others are struggling with step-family relationships in general, and many are simply looking for hope that their complicated family dynamics can eventually improve. I never expected to become a poster family for successful step-family relationships, I told Carlos recently. But if our experience can help other families avoid some of the pain we went through, or give them hope during their own difficult times, then I'm grateful that our story has broader meaning. One of the most rewarding aspects of sharing our story has been hearing from young people who found encouragement in learning that step-family relationships can evolve and improve over time. I receive emails from teenagers who are struggling to accept new step-parents, and I always tell them the same thing. It's okay to take time to trust, but stay open to the possibility that someone can love you genuinely even if they're not biologically related to you. The person trying to love you might be willing to wait 3 years for you to be ready to love them back, I often write, and sometimes, if you're really lucky, they might even be willing to give you a kidney to prove it. Looking back on the 8 years since I first met Carlos and his complicated, beautiful family, I'm struck by how much our definition of family has evolved. We started with a traditional idea that family relationships should be natural and immediate,
that love should be easy and reciprocal, and that biological connections are somehow more real than chosen ones. What we learned is that the most meaningful family relationships are often the ones that require the most patience, persistence, and faith to develop. The love between Megan and me is deeper and more authentic than many biological relationships, precisely because it was chosen rather than assumed, earned rather than given, and tested through crisis rather than taken for granted. The kidney I gave Megan 5 years ago continues to function perfectly, but the relationship we built around that gift has become something far more valuable than either of us could have imagined. She didn't just receive an organ from me, she received proof that love can be unconditional, that family can be chosen, and that sometimes the people who aren't supposed to matter to you can end up mattering the most. And I didn't just give away a kidney, I received a daughter who chose to love me back, a family that became real through commitment rather than biology, and the profound satisfaction of knowing that love, when combined with patience and persistence, really can overcome any barrier. The scar from my kidney donation surgery has faded to a thin white line that's barely visible now, but the emotional bonds forged during that experience have only grown stronger with time. Every day I'm reminded that the best things in life, love, family, trust, forgiveness, are often the things that take the longest to develop and require the most courage to pursue. Megan was right when she said I'd never be her real mom in the biological sense, but I became something even better. I became the person who loved her when she couldn't love me back, who believed in our relationship when she couldn't see its potential, and who was willing to give her a piece of my body because her life mattered more to me than my own comfort. That's not biology, that's choice. And choice, I've learned, creates the strongest families of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.